her mother. Then,
I just killed my mother.
what really happened? Will secrets from her past hold a clue?
She was a ticking time bomb.
From day one.
A daughter's dark side. Also, one of the richest men in Las Vegas. He buried 24 tons of silver in the desert, then ended up dead.
My husband was not breathing. I need someone to come out of the house.
Was this woman after his love or money? And a glamorous wife and her husband vanish. Then,
the body was buried 24 inches deep with one leg protruding.
who ends up dead and who is the killer? Family Secrets.
Hello and welcome to 2020 on ID. I'm John Quinones. It's a sad irony that when police think a death involves foul play, they often suspect a loved one first. And for a good reason. It's frequently the spouse or lover or family member who's responsible. But just because someone has been accused doesn't mean they did it. First, the case of Nikki Reynolds, a 17-year-old girl from a stable, loving family who went to church and got good grades, and one day killed her own mother for no reason, or so it seemed.
Teen romances, anxiety over tests, band practice. There's an all-American feel to Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High in South Florida. And 17-year-old Jacqueline Reynolds, known as Nikki, seemed to fit right in. A junior, she'd been on the honor roll and sang in the school choir. But all that changed forever on May 14th, 1997, with a 911 call that Nikki made from her home in Coral Springs.
You just killed my mother.
You just killed your mother?
Yes, I did.
How did you do that?
After repeatedly.
Where's the knife now?
The knife is in the sink. But you're going to know I killed her. There's blood over her and all over the floor and everything.
The chilling news stunned Nikki's classmates here at Douglas High. The Nikki Reynolds they knew was charming, friendly, outgoing. Did she stab her mother to death in a momentary act of insanity? Or was it cold-blooded murder? As investigators gathered details about Nikki's life before the killing, they began to focus on her troubled relationship with a young man named Carlos Infante.
What was Carlos like?
He wanted me to focus on him, and I did.
Nikki Reynolds had never given a television interview until she spoke with us about the murder and about her infatuation with Carlos Infante.
He would explain to me, that my parents were against him and that I should listen to him because he loves me and he's the one that's going to be with me forever anyway, so I believed what he had to say.
Her parents, Robert and Billie Jean Reynolds, disapproved of Carlos. He was a poor student, they told her, and didn't share their Christian fundamentalist beliefs.
I pretty much dropped my friendship with my parents for him.
What were your parents like?
Loving, provided everything for me, wanted the best for me.
And your mother?
She was my best friend. She really was. And my dad, he was like my buddy.
Nikki's parents got her involved in choir at their church, Coral Baptist, hoping that would be a positive influence. But it was clear the relationship with Carlos was transforming Nikki's life for the worse. In her junior year, her grades plummeted. She often skipped classes. She shut herself in her bedroom for hours, refusing to talk to her parents.
In your diary, you wrote, "Diary, you're my only friend now."
I felt, because nobody trusted me and I didn't know how to gain trust.
She says she lost her parents' trust after a disturbing incident back in 1996. Nikki claimed she was raped by a stranger after getting off a school bus. What actually happened, she says, was that she had just become sexually active with Carlos and thought she was pregnant.
I was trying to protect Carlos. I didn't want him to get in trouble. I didn't want my parents to hate Carlos.
So you concocted this rape.
At the time, it made perfect sense to me.
Billie Jean Reynolds tried to steer her daughter away from Carlos with little success. Nikki continued to defy her parents, sneaking Carlos into her bedroom to have sex, even having intercourse during lunch break in the school auditorium. Then in May 1997, a crisis. Carlos told her that the relationship was over.
What went through your mind?
I wanted to die. I pictured when he said he was going to be the one I was going to marry, I set my thoughts on that, and that was what I saw in my life.
You were only 17. You had a whole life ahead of you.
At the time, I wasn't thinking logically at all. Within those years, Carlos, he was an obsession, so my thinking was bizarre.
What was she like?
Rose Deary, a counselor at Douglas High, found in Nikki a desperate mixture of hope, anger, and falsehood.
She was showing everyone pictures of an ultrasound of a baby. And she showed it to me, said, look, here's my baby. And the strange thing is that there was a name cut out of the picture. I said, this is your baby? Oh, yes, look how precious.
You created a fantasy world.
I did.
Faking a pregnancy.
It was my way of gripping on not losing him, because he had mentioned that if I was pregnant, he'd never leave me.
It was here in this high school counseling office that Nikki's story about her pregnancy began to fall apart. Rose Deary met with Nikki's mother, Billie Jean Reynolds, and pressed her to get immediate psychiatric help for Nikki.
And I had given her the names of hospitals, hoping that she would be hospitalized that day for
Psychological problems.
behavior problems, surely. She was an adolescent who was not just telling fibs now and then, but it was a whole story. And her mother just started crying. So I put my arms around her, I hugged her, and I told her, I'll pray for you, and go home, your daughter needs you. And those words I'll remember the rest of my life. Because 3 hours later, her daughter killed her.
At first, everything seemed under control. Billie Jean Reynolds took Nikki to buy a pregnancy test kit at a local supermarket. At home, Nikki took the test. The result? She was not pregnant.
What was your mother's reaction when she found out that you weren't really pregnant?
She was angry that I would do so many lying and get so many people involved for just a simple relationship. But for me, it was life to me. He was my life at that point, an obsession.
Mrs. Reynolds sought help for her daughter that very afternoon. But instead of the psychiatric treatment that Rose Deary had recommended, she took Nikki for counseling at Coral Baptist Church. At the church, Nikki soon left the counseling session and went to the office of Pastor Herschel Kriesman.
What did Nikki tell you?
There's two questions really stand out. If someone does something bad, will God forgive? Well, my mind flashed back to the rape scene, which we now know was bogus. And I thought she was still grieving about that and was bothered with her conscience about that. Her second question was, if someone takes their life, will they still go to heaven?
And the reason why I asked him that question was because I had already taken a bunch of pills.
How much? How many?
It was a brand new bottle of aspirin. It was probably about half the bottle, and I wanted to die, so I figured that would be the easiest and quickest way to do it.
She had already taken the aspirin?
She did that before she came to see me, even, that afternoon. And I'm haunted by that knowledge now. Had I known then what I know now, I would have gone much deeper with that.
But Pastor Kriesman never had a chance to find out more. Nikki's mother came to his office to get her, and the discussion was over.
So you definitely were intending to kill yourself?
Yes, because I felt like my life falling apart. I lost Carlos. I felt like I've lost my parents, lost everything to hope for. I felt there was no reason to live anymore.
In fact, someone would die that night in the Reynolds home, but it wouldn't be Nikki.
17-year-old Nikki Reynolds is feeling desperate. After falsely claiming to be pregnant, her boyfriend has broken up with her, and her mother has taken her to counseling at their church. It would be their last outing together.
Billie Jean Reynolds and her daughter Nikki came back to their South Florida home from church at about 6 p.m. on May 14, 1997. Less than an hour later, a grisly scene. Mrs. Reynolds was dead, stabbed repeatedly by her daughter. For this 11th grader, life at home, life at school had come to an end.
What I'd like to do is talk to you about what happened today.
In a videotaped interview with police, she said it all began with a plan to kill her boyfriend, Carlos, because he had broken up with her.
Well, my plan to kill Carlos was to wait till he comes out of his first hour, come up behind him instead of syrup.
Her parents, she said, were in the way.
After we ate dinner, my dad decided he was going to go to church. So I figured this even makes it easier for me if I kill my mom and then clean up the mess and wait till my dad gets home. Then I'll kill him, and then I'll drive to school tomorrow, and then I'll kill Carlos. Well,
But after brutally stabbing her mother, Nikki told police she couldn't face any more killing. She was indicted for homicide, to be tried as an adult. The prosecutor, Broward County State's Attorney, Deborah Zimmett.
The charge was murder 1.
Correct.
What does that mean?
That she premeditated the murder of her mother and meant to bring about the death of her mother.
But the defense argued that Nikki Reynolds was not a murderer at all. Why not? Well, according to the defense, Nikki was not guilty by reason of insanity. Her attorney, Wayne Corey.
Well, I think she's a young, mentally ill woman, and I don't think she has the same viewpoint of normal persons who would never conceive of picking up a knife and using it toward their parent.
The story reads like one of the tragic plays of ancient Greece. A young woman, abandoned by her lover, strikes out viciously against her own mother. How do you make sense of such a senseless act? At Nikki's trial, the jurors could not reach a verdict on her guilt or innocence. They were hopelessly deadlocked. A second trial with a new jury began in November 1999.
She's aware of what she's doing.
The first prosecution witness was Nikki's father, Robert Reynolds.
Could you describe what she's wearing?
Reynolds told the jury the family dinner was tense the evening of May 14th, but that his daughter appeared to be acting normally.
If at all,
The prosecution then called Nikki's ex-boyfriend, Carlos Infante, to the stand.
We were just fighting about different things and I couldn't take it anymore.
Carlos testified that when Nikki told him by phone on the afternoon of May 14th that she'd been lying to him about being pregnant, he told her the relationship was over for good.
And this is where the conversation takes place, where Carlos is so angry with her, he could kill her himself. And that's where she began to think, you kill me? No, I'll kill you.
The plan was to kill Carlos at school the very next morning. But then Nikki's parents told her that she would have to go to counseling the next day instead of school.
And that's when she starts contemplating the killing of her parents.
At the trial, Deborah Zimmett showed jurors evidence of the brutality of the crime. The butcher knife that Nikki Reynolds took from the kitchen drawer.
She's in the kitchen and she's faking or acting as though she's cleaning the kitchen, when in reality she's pulling a knife out of the drawer and testing it to see if it's sharp enough to do the job, that being to slash somebody's throat.
I could actually feel her skin like against the knife, but it didn't cut her. When I looked at her.
The most dramatic evidence came from Nikki's own statement to police. She said she crept up on her mother while Mrs. Reynolds was typing up the church newsletter on her home computer.
She's facing the computer this way. I can't find her over here. Can't find her like that. And I even felt it when I was pulling out of the drawer to see if it would be sharp. I'm feeling him. This is sharp enough to cut him with his neck. I just cast down.
So many stab wounds, over 24 in all.
It's unbelievable as it may sound. I didn't want her to suffer. I wanted to just finish it off so she would just die already and not just sit there and suffer or something like that and bleed a long death. I just wanted to keep stabbing her so she'd lose blood and just die.
As her mother lay dying, Nikki says she began a bizarre conversation with her, asking to be forgiven.
I do remember saying, "Do you hate me?" She's like, "No, I don't hate you." I remember asking her if I was going to go to heaven. She's like, "Yes." She was nodding her head. And she's like, "Please stop." And she goes, "I'm dying." She kept saying, "I'm dying, I'm dying." And everything like that.
Nikki did not testify at the trial. In our interview, she told us she can't remember what happened, except for one thing.
All I can remember is Sister expressing that I need help and that she loves me.
Even as this was happening, she was saying she loved you.
And I remember asking her to help me stop, because I couldn't. I don't know what came over me.
But the defense did have an explanation for what came over Nikki Reynolds, and a lineup of witnesses they hoped would sway the jury toward a verdict of not guilty by reason of insanity. When we come back, a surprise witness drops a bombshell.
They got a defective product with no warning label.
She was a ticking time bomb.
From day one.
And Nikki Reynolds learns her fate. Stay with us.
Nikki Reynolds has confessed to stabbing her mother. Her defense team is pleading insanity, and they're about to reveal a secret that may explain why Nikki killed the woman who loved and raised her.
How could Nikki so brutally stab her mother to death? Had she been legally insane during the killing? That was the claim from her defense attorney, Wayne Corey.
I have always questioned whether Nikki meaningfully understood the consequences of her actions and whether she meaningfully understood the wrongfulness of it.
Corey brought in noted forensic psychiatrist William Vickery, who pored through records of the case. Vickery examined Nikki 4 times and began to assemble a psychological portrait of the teenager.
She seemed to not only have a major depression, but she had what we call a borderline personality disorder.
But why was Nikki Reynolds suffering from mental illness? No one had any idea until her defense attorney remembered that Nikki had been adopted when she was just 3 months old.
I thought I'd better at least try to find her biological mother, who had been out of the picture for about 18 years.
And you found her.
The court granted my motion to have her identity revealed.
And that led to a witness that would be a potential bombshell in the trial of Nikki Reynolds.
Do you acknowledge being the biological mother of the defendant in this case, Jacqueline Nicole Reynolds?
Yes, I am.
Katrina Ramos, pictured here in her high school yearbook, had given birth to Nikki as a single mother at the age of 19. She said she had never wanted to get pregnant and didn't have the money for an abortion.
I would fall down the stairs.
Intentionally?
Yes.
You were trying to self-abort.
Yeah. Sometimes I would get upset and I would just start punching myself in the stomach.
Punching yourself?
Yeah.
Dr. Vickery found a history of mental illness in Katrina Ramos, beginning in her teen years.
There's a strong, consistent, clear history of a mood disorder, depression, and this borderline personality disorder type of behavior.
Despite all that, Katrina Ramos gave birth to an apparently healthy girl. She told adoption authorities nothing about her efforts to self-abort, nothing about her history of depression or her abuse of drugs and alcohol during the pregnancy.
She hid all those things from the adoption agency, who could not turn around and indicate to the Reynolds, the baby we're handing to you may well in future suffer from this. They don't know what they have on their hands. They got a defective product with no warning label.
She was a ticking time bomb.
From day one.
The crux of the defense case was that Nikki inherited from her mother a genetic predisposition for mental illness.
The power of this illness genetically, which Nikki has, completely overwhelmed all the love that Billie Jean and the father gave her, and all the advantages that she had, and all the support and nurturing. All of that wasn't enough to keep Nikki from disintegrating.
Prosecution psychologist Dr. Michael Brannon said Nikki was not insane under the law because she knew right from wrong.
In this case, you have an individual who clearly showed her ability to discriminate wrongfulness by looking at the situation, thinking about it, and even testing ahead of time the knife to see whether or not it was sharp enough.
In the end, it came down to a detailed examination of Nikki's own words right after the killing. The defense claimed the 911 tape showed Nikki's break with reality. She appears to say that she's helped her mother by killing her. Prosecutor Deborah Zimmett said Nikki sounds emotional, but that she was not out of her mind.
I think she was in touch with reality even during that homicide, and I think that she remained in touch with reality at the time she made the 911 call.
The operator on the phone was like, well, please, can you check him out for me? I'm like, she's dead.
Nikki never took the stand to explain why she killed her mother, but she told us she's certain it was an act of insanity.
The person could have asked me seconds before it happened, would you ever do something like this? And I'd look at them like they were crazy. No, because I believe something was wrong that day. I really do believe there was an entity involved in that.
If Nikki Reynolds was found to be legally insane at the time of the killing, she would be sent to a psychiatric hospital instead of prison. It would be her only hope for early release and a chance to rebuild her life.
Defendant is guilty of the lesser included crime of murder in the second degree with a weapon. So say we all.
Second-degree homicide. The jury had decided Nikki Reynolds had been sane when she stabbed her adoptive mother to death. They found she did not premeditate the killing, but that she did carry it out with hatred and with evil intent.
And the first thing that went through my mind when I heard second degree was, that's wrong. That's wrong because there was no hate and no malice. And that bothers me to this day. I feel like I am charged with the wrong charge.
Nikki Reynolds was back in court for sentencing.
I have torn a family apart, a family who's only done anything but love me and provided for me. I've hurt innocent people, and I have torn my life apart.
Minutes later, Judge Sheldon Shapiro made up his mind.
Okay, the court sentences the defendant to 410 months Florida State Prison.
He gave Nikki the maximum sentence under the law, 34 years and 2 months.
Nikki, a lot of people watching this are going to say she deserves all that time, if not more. This was a murder.
Yes, there was a life taken, and yes, maybe I do deserve more time, but I'm also an individual, and an individual you can't just throw away. They need help too.
Nikki Reynolds is serving her sentence at an all-women's prison in Florida. Nikki now passes her days tormented by the ghostly presence of Billie Jean Reynolds.
You know, all she ever did was, you know, show me love and everything. Even if they could bring her back, just to be they could lock me up forever just to bring her back with my dad and my family so they could be happy again.
Since Nikki Reynolds' trial, Florida has changed its sentencing laws, and her prison term was reduced to 21 years. As of 2013, she's expected to be released on parole in 2016. When we come back, love, money, and murder in Las Vegas.
Not an emergency. My husband was not breathing. I need someone to come out of the house.
Was he murdered for his millions?
He didn't commit suicide. This wasn't an accidental overdose. They did it for greed, lust. They did it for money.
Stay with us. Our next story is set in Las Vegas, where a millionaire falls for a topless dancer 30 years his junior and then turns up dead. But as John Miller first reported in 1999, it wasn't as simple as it might seem.
Ted Binion, heir to one of the great gambling dynasties of Las Vegas. He was the youngest son of the man who built the Horseshoe Casino, Texas gangster Benny Binion. There's a statue of Benny outside the casino now. And for a few years, his son Ted ran the place. And although Ted became wildly rich, a fortune estimated at $55 million, he also became a heroin addict. And only months after casino regulators stripped him of his right to run the Horseshoe, Ted Binion was found dead here at his $1 million home.
Not an emergency. My husband is not breathing. I need someone to come out of the house.
This is the woman who made that phone call, and she wasn't then, and never has been, married to Ted Binion. In fact, Sandra Murphy met Binion while dancing for him topless at this Las Vegas strip joint. They had been living together for more than 3 years. When I interviewed her, it was the first time she'd spoken on the record with any reporter about her involvement with Ted Binion.
You were living with Ted Binion for 3 years. Did you love him?
Of course I did. He was my man.
Do you miss him?
Very much.
But according to friends, those tears belied reality. Ted Binion, they said, was about to end his relationship with Sandy. And chillingly, a day before his body was found, he had told his attorney to cut Sandra Murphy out of his will, a will that had given her the Binion mansion and $300,000.
They found Teddy Binion in the den, lying on a mattress with an empty bottle of Xanax near the body.
At first, homicide detectives like Wayne Peterson attributed Binion's death to an overdose of the drug Xanax and to Binion's years-long heroin addiction. But what police at that time didn't know was that Sandra Murphy was seeing another man. This man, a man named Rick Tabish, who had called himself a friend of Ted Binion's. And when did Rick Tabish show up at the Binion house? The very day he died.
But I just came to pay my respects and find out what happened to him. He's a friend of mine. Okay, thank you. Appreciate it.
But the Binion family didn't believe Rick Tabish was a friend, and Binion's sister Becky had no doubt Ted's death was murder, and no doubt about who was responsible.
Based on what you know now, do you think Sandy Murphy killed your brother?
Based on what I know now, I think Sandy Murphy and Rick Tabish murdered my brother.
For the money?
For his money.
Part of the reason Becky Binion is so convinced is this: $6 million worth of silver ingots and silver coins. That's what police say they caught Rick Tabish and some friends of his trying to steal 2 days after Binion's body was found. Binion had buried his treasure in the desert 60 miles away from Las Vegas, and Rick Tabish was one of a handful of people who knew where it was. Why? Because Ted Binion hired Tabish to build this secret vault here.
When the police confronted them and said, what are you doing here? What are you digging up? What did they say?
Mr. Tabish said they're removing cement.
When police didn't immediately charge Tabish and Murphy with homicide, the Binion family hired private detective Tom Dillard to investigate. He spent 6 months building a case that Sandra Murphy and Rick Tabish were lovers, and that Ted's death was no accident. 6 months later, the state of Nevada agreed.
He was murdered for lust, for greed.
Clark County prosecutor David Roger began his first-degree murder case against Sandy Murphy and Rick Tabish 18 months after Ted Binion's body was found. Murphy was also charged with theft, stealing $20,000 from Binion, and Tabish was charged as her accomplice.
It's not murder. This case is about money.
Defense attorney John Mamet means the Binion money. Money he says that went to buy an investigation to prove that a loved one was murdered when he was really a tired, depressed heroin addict.
What you're saying is that the Binions didn't like the outcome of the police investigation, so they bought their own murder investigation?
They didn't like the outcome of it. They conducted their own investigation, got their own expert, and said, here, now state of Nevada, do something about it. And the DA's office here did something about it. The true fact is, Sandy Murphy did not kill Ted Binion.
How would you characterize this trial compared to all other cases?
That's a trial of a lifetime.
He didn't commit suicide. This wasn't an accidental overdose. They did it for greed. They did it for lust. They did it for money.
This man was introduced as a childhood friend of Tabish's, a man named Kurt Gratzer.
Rick had me go over scenarios with him in which I'd be shooting this man in the head with one of his handguns, one of his loaded handguns.
Defense attorney Louis Palazzo argued the friend's story was too bizarre to be believed.
And Mr. Tabish was going to pay you $100,000 and upwards to $3 million to kill this person because this person would not pay Mr. Tabish $13,000. Is that your testimony for the jury?
Partly, yes.
As for Sandra Murphy, prosecutors found not one, but 2 witnesses who said she had predicted Ted Binion's death of an overdose just a week before he died. This was one, a manicurist, Dina Perry.
Did she tell you when he was going to die of a drug overdose?
Within 3 weeks.
Did she tell you what type of drug overdose he was going to experience within 3 weeks?
Heroin.
Again, the defense scoffed.
We had a manicurist who never met my client before, sits with her for a period of 4 hours. And in the first hour, my client admits to homicide, theft, robbery, drugs. Does a complete confession all in 1 hour.
And prosecutors also brought in one of the nation's most visible pathologists, Dr. Michael Bodden of New York, to say that Murphy and Tabish suffocated Ted Binion when they found he was not dying quickly enough of his overdose. Bodden testified he found marks on Binion's lip that could have only come in one manner.
The upper lip and the left side of the lip rubbed against something that was tightly held against the mouth. My opinion is he died of asphyxia by suffocation.
But the defense pointed out that none of that speculation was in the original autopsy conducted by the county coroner.
I mean, never have I seen a homicide case operate in this fashion when you have coroner's findings changed after 6 months.
Neither Rick Tabish nor Sandra Murphy took the stand in their own defense, but Murphy was often crying in court, especially when autopsy photos of Ted Binion were shown. And she broke down completely when prosecutors played a barely understandable audio tape of a police interview with her hours after Binion's death. When the case was finally ended, the judge, a born and bred New Yorker named Joseph Bonaventure, took 38 minutes to race through 71 pages of jury instruction, a long and complex and difficult case. In the end, the jury deliberated for 64 hours, over 8 days. Rick Tabish looked confident, and Sandra Murphy was positively beaming for a minute.
We, the jury, in the above entitled case, find the defendant, Sandra Renee Murphy, guilty of murder of the first degree. We, the jury, in the above entitled case, find the defendant, Richard Bennett Tabish, guilty of murder of the first degree.
As the verdicts were read, Murphy and Tabish maintained their composure. But as the jury was deciding what penalty to impose, Rick Tabish fought tears, and a sobbing Sandra Murphy took the stand to beg for mercy.
I want to say that I'm sorry to the Binion family. And I'm sorry for the day I walked out that door on September 17th and left him there alone. And I'm sorry to Teddy for not being there when he needed me the most. And I'm sorry.
The convictions of Sandra Murphy and Rick Tabish were later overturned on a technicality. They were retried and both acquitted of Ted Binion's murder. However, they were convicted on charges related to the attempted theft of millions of dollars in silver and sentenced to 1 to 5 years in prison. Both have served out their sentences and say they will continue to fight to clear their names. Coming up next, everybody seemed to know him.
You need a lawyer, make the right choice. I'm Larry McNabney.
But no one really knew much about her.
Cold, calculating, devoid of a heart. A black widow, perhaps?
Would his love for her cost him his life? Stay with us. He was a successful, well-known lawyer pursuing a rich man's hobby, show horses. She was his young, glamorous wife with a murky past. First, he went missing, and then she did. And then the shocking truth about the disappearances came out.
Larry McNabney, Sacramento, California.
Larry McNabney was the kind of guy who made himself noticed everywhere he went.
I first met Larry at a horse show in Ukiah, California. Right off the bat, just a person that you singled out. If it was cloudy, he could make it bright. All he had to do was smile and just laugh.
So it astonished just about everyone when this rich, gregarious man about town left a horse show and simply vanished. It was all the more surprising since he seemed to have the kind of life that no one would want to run away from, including a young, stunning wife and 3 loving children. Tavia is his second oldest.
He's a very bright individual, an attorney that was absolutely mesmerizing for me to watch. Very loving.
If you need a lawyer, make the right choice. I'm Larry McNabney. Call me.
Advertising was key to Larry's success as a personal injury lawyer. These ads not only attracted numerous clients, but also Elisa, his fifth wife.
She was considerably younger than he was at that time.
She was a very interesting, social, charismatic woman.
2 years after getting married, they moved from Reno to Sacramento, where Elisa introduced Larry to the glamorous world of show horses. But the first sign there was something sinister at work in the life of Larry McNabney came at the National Horse Championships. It was also the last time Larry was seen by his friends.
Witnesses said that on September 10th, Larry was performing in the halter class competition, and he just wasn't performing up to his usual routine.
Sheriff Baxter Dunn would eventually be called in to investigate what happened to Larry McNabney.
He was making mistakes that a guy of his stature in horse shows wouldn't make. And that evening, he went up to his room, said he wasn't feeling well.
The next day, vendors at the show saw Larry's wife, Elisa, taking Larry away in a wheelchair to their trailer.
She said he got so drunk that she was embarrassed and had to wheel him out.
Larry was known as a heavy drinker who had been in and out of rehab over the years. So when Elisa told some friends in private that Larry was back in rehab, it made sense. But to others, Elisa seemed less than forthcoming about his whereabouts.
That he was in Reno or Vegas, just partying. She also said that he had had a stroke.
Friends and family knew there was something Elisa was hiding about Larry's disappearance.
We were thinking that maybe they had separated and she just wasn't telling us yet.
Eventually, office employees concerned about Larry's prolonged absence called police. But when they tried to interview Elisa about her husband, she was never home.
They were always trying to locate her, but she was always around the country, I guess what I would call jet setting.
Then the disappearance of Larry McNabney took an even more bizarre and sinister turn. On January 11th, his wife Elisa also went missing, last seen driving away from the McNabney home in a red Jaguar. Now police were investigating 2 missing persons and had no clues as to what happened to either one of them. And friends say no one, not even Larry, knew enough about Elisa's past to help police bring her into focus.
Larry had indicated early on that she just didn't check out. I said, "Aren't you concerned about this?" And he would say, I've got everything under control.
But was that really true? Even before they got married, Elisa was accused of stealing $1 million from Larry's clients, for which Larry was held accountable. But somehow Larry didn't blame her.
He was obsessed with her for whatever reason. He knew what she had done. And he knew that he would constantly have to worry about her, that he couldn't trust her, but he wanted to be with her.
With family and friends unable to help in the investigation, police were stymied. Then, about a month after Elisa disappeared, the break in the case that everyone most feared, police found Larry McNabney. In a vineyard in Northern California, farm workers discovered his body.
The body was buried 24 inches deep with one leg protruding from the very shallow grave that obviously had been mauled by wildlife.
With the disappearance of Larry McNabney now a murder investigation, police quickly discovered his horse trailer. Inside, they found all of his still missing wife Elisa's belongings, including documents that would lead investigators to Elisa's past and would transform her from a potential second victim into the primary suspect.
Found out from the Florida authorities that she's used 38 different aliases.
Elisa McNabney, alias Elizabeth Barish, alias Shane Ivaroni, was first arrested in 1988 and has spent numerous times in jail for stolen property and grand theft. Her arrest followed a pattern of fleecing unsuspecting men of their money. But was she capable of murder?
How would you describe Elisa?
Cold, calculating, devoid of a heart. A black widow, perhaps.
There's no question that Elisa wanted to sever the relationships with people that could keep an eye on Larry.
But Elisa did encourage relationships with people in the world of show horses. Ironically, it was here that Elisa made the slip-up that gave police the break they needed. When an autopsy discovered Larry had been killed with a horse tranquilizer, ace-promazine, the McNabney's friend, Evan Reese, told police of a chilling conversation he had with Elisa more than a year ago.
We were at a horse show, and she said, "Could you kill somebody with this?" And I said, "You mean a horse?" She says, "No, a person."
But why would Elisa murder a man who seemed so willing to give her anything she wanted? Larry's daughter believes Elisa just wanted the money, and the man got in the way.
How can money be worth causing someone this much pain? I don't understand it.
On March 18th, the Black Widow, surrounded by police, surrendered, saying, "I'm the one you're looking for." The very next day, Elisa confessed. She also admitted she had an accomplice, her best friend and co-worker at Larry's law office, Sarah Dutra. In Elisa's 3-page confession, she admits that she and Sarah fed Larry the horse tranquilizer and then drove him into the mountains.
It's at that point that Elise McNabney says that they tried to bury him, but he was still alive.
It wasn't until they returned home that night, continuing to feed him the tranquilizer, that Larry died.
They loaded him into the refrigerator. He remained in the refrigerator for about 3 months.
During that time, Elisa coldly sold off everything she could, raising $500,000. Then she says she tried to do right by the husband she murdered.
Elise McNabney told investigators in Florida that she buried him in a vineyard because he always liked wine.
You've been in law enforcement 34 years. Have you ever seen anything as viciously conniving as this murder?
Never anything as conniving as Elise McNabney.
On March 31st, the woman everyone knew as Elisa McNabney committed suicide, hanging herself in her jail cell.
My brother and I went out to the vineyard to see where they had found Daddy's body and hoped that it would bring us some closure. It didn't bring any closure. It made me angrier. I don't know if I can ever forgive her, but I'm going to try so that my life can move on.
In a bizarre twist, Elisa McNabney left behind a letter addressed to her lawyer. In it, she demanded that he sue the jail because she had been able to commit suicide while in protective custody. Sarah Dutra, Elisa's accomplice, was convicted for her role in the death of Larry McNabney. She was sentenced to 11 years and was released on parole in 2011. I'm John Quinones. Please join us next time for another edition of 2020 on ID.